There we are. Welcome everyone to Diverse Voices, dedicated to sharing leadership stories with viewers. Hi LinkedIn, hi YouTube. Today is Wednesday. It is the last day of Pride. Sad emoji. I'm so sorry. But corporate support of LGBTQ plus does not have to end. That's why I'm excited to have Melissa Madzel, Managing Director, Equity Initiatives for Koya Partners. Melissa is responsible for ensuring that Koya's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is infused into every aspect of the firm's work with clients and candidates. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Michael. Thanks so much for having me today.
I'm so excited to see you. I know you and I are both in New York, just in different areas of the city right now. Actually, that's not the city, but don't tell. And I think this is going to be fun for everyone who's joining us. It's an opportunity to talk a little bit about Pride is ending, but what can we do beyond Pride? I think that's really important to a lot of employees. Maybe we can start, Melissa, if you could share a little bit about your current role at Koya that focus on nonprofits to sort of set the stage.
Absolutely. Well, and as a little piece of context, Koya Partners is an executive search firm that works nationally and even globally, really, to place leaders in executive positions of nonprofits, predominantly, also in higher education. And we're part of the Diversified Search Group, a larger family of search firms. And so I get this privilege of thinking about everything that we do to engage our candidates, to support our candidates, and really to think about how we make sure that barriers are taken away and opportunities are open for as many people as possible. And it's a great deal of fun. And I get to apply the work that I've done from having been a search lead for a number of years, especially in the social justice space, and apply that knowledge, also the knowledge that I have as a social worker and having done work in a number of different parts of the nonprofit sector. So it's a great privilege to do the work.
It's such exciting and valuable work. I recognize there's a lot going on today. There's a lot of change occurring, and I think that having someone like yourself and your experience working with employees who are trying to figure out what the new normal could look like, but also their role in it, what they're really driving to achieve, what they would like to see in their lives will be so very valuable. And that's what I'm excited to really focus on today. I was thinking we could start a little bit from the standpoint of data. I was doing a little bit of homework because I'm big on homework. And according to a 2018 report, that was the nearest I could find, but according to a 2018 report by the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, the HRC, one of 46% of LGBTQ Americans remains closeted in the workplace. So I thought we could start with talking about what's the current state of the workplace for the LGBTQ plus community.
I think that is a great place to start. There's such a range of experiences that people have. I'm in the nonprofit space, and there are lots of parts of the nonprofit space that are quite inclusive. I want to say broadly, the nonprofit sector has really been on the leading edge of diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations organizationally. And so it's fantastic to see other sectors learning from the nonprofit world, but that doesn't mean that it's across the board. It doesn't mean that it's everywhere. In big cities like New York and DC and LA and San Francisco and Miami, there in Chicago, there is a lot more inclusivity and ability for people to be safe being out at work. But that's not the case in so many parts of the country, and especially in organizations that don't have a culture that has built inclusivity into the policies, into the practices, and into the people who are there. And so it's something that's evolving. And I think that we can, especially those of us who are in bigger cities, can forget that there's a lot of the country that doesn't have that openness and inclusivity.
I really appreciate you setting the stage in that way, because we live in a little bit of a bubble. I think people who are who work in diverse cultures and inclusive environments forget that there are certainly many aspects, a full spectrum, not only of national, but the international workforce that may be a little bit more insulated, that may have been driven by a cause or by a leader from day one, and that's the framing of the organization. I was curious if there are maybe some exemplary organizations that are creating more inclusive cultures that you sort of hold up high as a good example.
You know, I think rather than calling out specific organizations, just because I get to work with so many that are doing really fantastic things, I've seen some trends that
Hmm.
have existed across a number of organizations that I would pull out. And I think that there are the sort of symbolic things that are becoming more and more common, and it's using pronouns in email signatures, in meetings, on Zoom and video chats. Sorry if you hear my 2-year-old out there. It's a rough day. And so so things like that. I think a lot of organizations and a lot of companies are really relying on rainbows as a symbol, as we use rainbows, right? As a symbol of demonstrating pride internally and externally. The thing that is a challenge, of course, is making sure that we don't just stop there with those things. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about. And so the really inclusive cultures that I see are those that look at their policies and think through, what changes do we need to make to our healthcare policies? What changes do we need to make to how we define family or how we define partners? Those things are real, especially when we're thinking about family building, when we're thinking about healthcare, when we're thinking about bereavement policies or sick policies. All of those things really reflect the breadth of the nature of who family is. And who family is for a lot of us in the queer community is it's not the definition that has been the textbook definition for generations. We've really changed what the meaning of family is. I think there's also a lot of opportunity to think through what diversity looks like and how diversity is talked about internally and externally, so that it is not just about race. I think in race and gender, those are the two things that a lot of organizations really rely on. And we need to include the LGBTQ plus community as we're talking about diversity. We need to know who's represented in our organizations and our companies, and to make sure that we are reflecting our commitment back to those employees.
I really appreciate that. When I think about policies, practices, and procedures, again, you broached insurance, which some may think it's an exorbitant cost, but the LGBTQ plus community is only in essence, a fraction of the broader spectrum of the employee community. The conversations can really talk to not just the financial impact, but the psychological impact that putting those policies in place are, I think, relatively easy to turn on. And once they're in place, all it is HR and leadership simply supporting it and ensuring that as every new employee comes on, they recognize and understand these are the behaviors that are allowed and the culture we're striving to build within our organization as we evolve.
That's right. That's right.
I am curious, you brought up a great, meaningful way to look at it, policies, practices, and procedures, and even pronouns. Is there the opportunity when an organization looks to pronouns of how that change can be revolutionary in so many ways, just showing a little bit of support?
I think so. I think that it is something that for certain generations, I'll say, might take some getting used to. It might feel a little bit clumsy or uncomfortable or even strange at first. You know, why do we have to go around talking about our pronouns all the time? And when it gets down to it, it's a symbol that is very important to show people who are coming into the organization, people who are interacting with the organization internally and externally, that we are a place that recognizes difference. And that's okay. We don't pretend it's not there. We don't try to reduce people into binary structures. We recognize that there is a lot of room for difference and individualization, and that this is a community that appreciates that. And in that rollout, there is definitely opportunity to talk about that concept and the concept of gender differences with staff, to help familiarize people with the language. This is how you might say this type of sentence. This is how you might respond. This is how you ask someone what their pronouns are, because a lot of people are very nervous about that. There's also and people come to us a lot and ask for advice on how to ask for pronouns from candidates who are applying for jobs. And that's an interesting piece too.
Yeah, I think that education and that sensitivity just shows the evolution of not only the work environment, but the broader culture. I think back to maybe if I look historically in the 70s, when using the term Ms. instead as a neutralizing way of approaching women in the workplace was just it was a change. And certainly the older generations at that time were caught off guard. But if you look at those of us, not me, who might have been in the workforce at that time, and were at the front of that change, who maybe were in their early 20s, they're now maybe the baby boomers, and they have an opportunity to look at the changes that they experienced and just understand this is natural.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I am curious, when you talk a little bit about the impact of the visual, where can language and imagery set the stage, maybe as a signifier to prospective employees about what that culture could be like when they get on board?
Yeah. The use of images, the use of language are so important, and they are things that people dig into when they're trying to determine where to work. So certainly on the website, in job descriptions, making sure to use gender neutral language on the website, gender neutral language in job descriptions. Those things are clear. The images that are reflected, we want to show a diversity of genders. We want to show a diversity of sexual orientation to the extent that that can be shown visually, right? You just never know. And then I think when you think about things like the handbook, the employee handbook, or onboarding materials or onboarding sessions, it's helpful to include language about the openness to the LGBTQ community. Any sort of reference to partners as opposed to spouses is helpful and important. Even things like dress codes that might be in the employee handbook. I can think of organizations where dress codes talk about stockings and high heels, or talk about hairstyles or skirts and or wearing ties, things like that are so gendered, and where members of the LGBTQ community might not feel comfortable. So those are other pieces that I think can be can just help to show, as somebody's considering an organization or as they're coming into an organization, what the culture is going to be around their safety.
What are the steps we can look at pre-handbook? Like, I start to think of, you mentioned the website, I start to think of combing the website and looking for DERGs or ERGs as a signifier of what that culture could look like and where allyship may show up. Is there something we can talk a little bit around that, or maybe another instance that comes to mind?
Yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of organizations in the nonprofit sector now have an explicit page that's dedicated to DEIB. And I think that's really useful, as long as the language is meaningful and authentic. It is not useful if it's just sort of hollow language that's not reflected in anything else internally. Then, it's not any different than just having your rainbow logo for June and taking it down on July 1st and forgetting about queer people for the rest of the year. And so I'm a big proponent of having a DEIB page, including language that is explicit about the organization's culture and what diversity is in the organization in job descriptions. Mm-hmm. I think certainly promoting any sort of initiatives that take place and throughout the website around community building. So employee resource groups, affinity groups, those types of things. But also when you think about if there's sponsorships that the organization does, if there are organizational memberships or associations that employees belong to, including that in the employee bios, so that if employees are, for instance, on the board of the Hedrick Martin Institute, that's a signifier to people who know what the Hedrick Martin Institute is, or other organizations like the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, or other organizations that do work in the queer community. When people who are looking at the bios of the leaders see those types of names of organizations represented, then they know, okay, this is a place where I might find people who get my community and are committed to the issues that I care about. Similarly, if there are volunteer days that the organization does, I love taking my kids to the center's family pride events every year and seeing the corporate volunteers that are there. And so I really hope that the companies that send their corporate volunteers are promoting that on their website. And I think that there's also a chance to consider the ways that that leadership supports and creates a safe space in the initial conversations that candidates are having, that demonstrates openness. So not assuming that somebody is straight, not assuming that somebody, just because somebody has a child, don't assume that they're married to somebody of the opposite sex. Don't assume that they're married. Don't assume, taking out the assumptions, and just because I think a lot of small talk happens around interviews. As much as we try to advise against that, it does come up, and especially as people get further along, and there can be offhanded comments that are made that can really turn folks off in those early stages.
Yeah, that's such an important point. Not only the aspect of the microaggressions or just micro messaging that comes across, but also the sense of intent. What is this environment going to have as a sense of habit and behavior? I think a little bit about the way that you mentioned leadership sort of neutralizing the conversation and creating a safe space. We had a question that came from one of our audience members, and I was hoping maybe you and I could talk to this a little bit, really asking a little bit about that aspect of pronouns, because it is so new, as you mentioned a little earlier. I think it's an opportunity to treat everyone the same, but maybe we could talk a little bit to David's question around pronouns and sort of set the stage for our viewership.
Yes, so I think at a base level, it's important to know somebody's pronoun, because when we're talking about someone, it is best to refer to that person in the way that they see themselves. And if they do not see themselves in the way that their body may be representing them externally in that moment, then we're not seeing them for who they are. I think there are probably more articulate ways to say that, but it's just a way to just let people know that we respect who they are through and through. We want people to know that they're safe. We want people to know that they're welcome, that they're included. And by asking somebody, what pronouns do you use? It gives them the opportunity to self-identify before we're making assumptions and assigning anything to them based on our own biases, based on our own experiences, and based on our own expectations of what gender is or is not. And so treating everyone the same, you want to treat everyone the way they want to be treated, and that might not be the same for everyone. So that's a really good nuance to how to think about that, David.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa. I think that to add to that, there's also the aspect of thinking about yourself in the room and those moments, David, or anyone else who's watching, what you've had when you felt a little bit of an affront, when I think when you meet someone new and you forget their name, or you're referring to them in the context of the room. Have you ever had the experience of someone saying, oh, that person? Well, there's a way of saying that person, or there's a way of saying that guy or that girl, and it can come across as a little bit like a sense of disrespect, or a sense of lack of respect or equality. The opportunity to understand someone's pronouns can also be the aspect of knowing how they'd like to be referred to when they're not there and they can't represent themselves. How do you represent them and talk about them in a way that creates equal footing? And also, to your point, Melissa, neutralizes the assumptions and gives them the space to be who they want to be from day one in an organization. So I'm thrilled for that type of question. I think there's an aspect of the indicators we've discussed and the interview process we've discussed. I really encourage for people who are looking into what an organization can be once they're there, to in essence look at their LinkedIn page and look through the employees. What do you see? What comes across to you? Even if it's your own biases coming through and what you see, you might start to observe a pattern that welcomes you, because you see people who could be a reflection of you or define themselves like you. I know for my friends who are veterans, they love seeing when they look through a LinkedIn page and the employees that someone names their veteran status. Because it can help them understand, oh, there are people who've had my shared experience. Pronouns, to your point, could be another indicator. Are there other ways within the interview process that prospective employees can ask the probative questions of the potential employer and let them know that that potential employer is being interviewed just as much as the candidate?
Absolutely. There are some questions that immediately come to mind. One, asking the interviewer, how would you describe the company's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Hmm.
What has the company done in the last year to reflect that? So that you get a sense of what's actually happening, not just what people are talking about. You could also ask how diversity is measured within the organization, what benchmarks are there, what are the demographics of the organization, and really aim to get an understanding at the different levels. There might be a great deal of diversity in junior staff, for instance, gender diversity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity. But then as you get into the higher ranking staff members or the leadership, the executive leadership, if the entire executive leadership looks and feels the same and brings the same background, then that might raise some questions about how decisions are being made and about the ways that bias is being reflected in leadership decisions and policies that are being made. It is useful also to ask about specific policies, and that would be an appropriate question to have with the HR person that you speak to in an interview process if you have concerns about specifics around insurance or concerns around any other particular things that may be coming up, especially if you're someone who's transitioning and you know that that's going to be part of your ongoing experience while working at the organization. Use the HR person to discuss those things and get a sense of has this happened before? Am I the first person at the organization? Are there other people who might have had similar experiences? And it is fully appropriate, especially as you get into higher levels, to ask to speak to somebody else during the interview process who may also be a member of the LGBTQ community. And there might not be somebody to talk to, especially in smaller organizations, if there just aren't that many people. But it's nice to ask, and it will certainly send a message that you're interested in knowing that you have a community. If nothing else, when you're walking through the office, now that we're going to get back to in-person interviews in the coming months and year, as you're walking through the office, take a look at what's on people's desks. If you can peek and see what's on people's desks, and you see the family pictures, you see a rainbow flag here, you see a sticker there, things like that. Those are things that just help to further drive home micro signals.
Those are some amazing suggestions. I also think about when I was a candidate in my younger days, I didn't want to come across as asking too much. That, like there's the opportunity to think of, well, they're hiring me and I don't want to come across as too needy, too demanding, that I'm going to be a burden on the organization. Isn't it a more modern way of looking at it to appreciate that when the candidate looks at the aspects of their partnership with an organization as a whole self, that it really talks about their longevity within the organization? Maybe there are other aspects.
Certainly. When we know that when people feel more included, when they feel like they can be their authentic selves, they bring greater commitment to the organization. They just stay longer, they contribute more, and that's something that we want to support. We're seeing certainly too for younger generations of employees that they expect something different from the workplace. A lot of us expected before. They are looking for a place where they can balance more of their personal values with their professional values. And so with that, it's important to ensure that they can feel like this is a place where they can commit for a number of years, that they're having the opportunity to have their voice heard and to build community. It's very different than it used to be, where people thought about work as clocking in from 9 to 5 and then going home and shutting off. Now we're expecting employees to be accessible and on around the clock. And so around the clock, people have full, whole identities, and we want them to be able to represent those in their careers.
Yeah, I think back to some old language that people used to use, which is, why do you have to put X in front of someone's face? But the last 18 months taught us anything. There is such diversity. I can think of so many clients and colleagues that I saw the inside of their kitchen. I saw their cat. I heard their children in the background, and really started to appreciate not everyone had a separate room by which they could break away from their daily lives and show it up a little differently. I think that there was a lot of equity and a lot of learning from so many people during those times.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, you talked a little bit about younger people. I was curious if you could maybe set yourself back, and if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, something you wish you knew perhaps, what would that be?
Hmm. So I think in retrospect, what I would tell myself is don't worry about the story. The story will write itself. Do the things that are interesting. Because I had the chance, thanks to a lot of really wonderful managers throughout the course of my career, to try out different things and to test and to say, oh, this isn't part of my day job, but I'm doing great at my day job. So I'm going to add this on and jump into this extra responsibility. And those things have been the opportunities for me to continue to grow and pivot and build relationships and build experiences. So that's the biggest thing that I would say. The other thing that I would say is probably give leadership a little bit of a break. raise a fuss when it's important, but remember the number of things that leaders are considering, and be conscious of what's important to put your social capital behind and your professional capital behind. What are the fights that are really worth fighting? What are the things that maybe in the scheme of things, this might not be the biggest fight to have.
That is fantastic advice for the younger Melissa. It also makes me think for the modern and young, the Gen Zs who are entering the workforce, that there's this opportunity to use that moment of maybe friction as an opportunity just to share in a calmer voice, in a more welcoming voice. Here's what I observed. I don't know if that was your intent,
Yes.
but maybe it's an opportunity for learning.
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, those leaders aren't perfect people. They are human. And that's the opportunity as well for us to teach them. So let's flash forward a little bit. 5 years from now, is there an HR policy you'd love to see put into practice?
Oh, I dream of a 4-day work week. I would love to see us start to normalize 4-day work weeks. I think that the current norms of what's expected to have full lives outside of work, and the ways that we're connected beyond the hours that we're sitting at a desk or sitting in our office or in front of our computer, it's also different. And so I would like to see us move to a 4-day work week. And I think a lot of organizations under COVID have tried that out and found that people are then coming to work refreshed and whole and less distracted, because they're able to handle the doctor's appointments and the grocery shopping and all the things that they hadn't been able to get to because they're dealing with so much on the weekends. And so I think that would be my ideal policy. And I think another thing that I would love to see, just to become more of a practice, and I think it will happen organically, is the training of leaders in particular to have inclusive conversations. I think back to some of the questions that I've had to answer over the course of my career by colleagues, but especially colleagues who are in leadership positions, asking me fairly personal questions about my sexual orientation, about my family, and I would love to see just a little bit more support to leaders to figure out what's appropriate and what's not.
Those are great pieces of advice for your future self, and also a way of looking at things a little bit differently. There's that opportunity to, I think when we all become a little bit more friendly at work, yes, some of those uncomfortable moments do come up, and there can be ways in which it's appropriate, but there are offhanded comments that are just not really necessary, that come out of people's mouths too easily. There's an old adage from my grandmother, which is, when it's in your head, it's yours, and when it's out your mouth, it's the world's.
Yes.
I don't know if she made it up, but it's true. It's so very true. I'm thrilled, Melissa, that we were able to get a little bit of time today to hear some of your great thinking and some of your learnings. I really appreciate you being open to spending some time with us today. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for all the work that you and
I'm going to wish you truly a pleasure. I want to thank everyone else who's been watching today, and everyone who watches this later on. If there are questions you have for Melissa, myself, or Sederman Connect, please reach out to us. And I hope you have a fantastic end of Pride and an enjoyable rest of the day. All right. Be well, all. Bye, Melissa.
Bye-bye.